Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is the ongoing series, One Last Thing, with Ken McCusick and Slava Cooperstein. How you doing, Slava?
Doing well, Ken. How about yourself?
No complaints. Day after cutdown day, we're recording this. So our One Last Thing refers to the activity of the Baltimore Ravens roster-wise in the last day or so. We are recording this at a few minutes after noon on Wednesday and actively awaiting the Ravens or the NFL information on who clears waivers at this point. So lots of interesting information, a lot of names out there. Reverse order, the Ravens select 23rd among the waiver claims, so that's one of the interesting things. But let's start with the interesting stuff. The people that you can really dig your teeth in to start with is who made the Ravens roster and who were some of the surprises. And I guess we start with the UDFAs who made it, Malik Ham and Keaton Mitchell. Keaton Mitchell, no surprise at all. Malik Ham, a little bit of a surprise because I think people thought Bowser would be back for the opener.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest surprise. I mean, you probably it's all wrapped up with, depending on how you thought about Tyus Bowser's return. If you were convinced that he was going to be on NFI to start the season, I think after the preseason that Malik Ham's had, it probably isn't a surprise at that point. But if you were holding out hope, like many of us were, thinking that maybe Bowser will only be a week or two, then yeah, it is a little bit of a surprise. But luckily, he's shown out in preseason.
Yeah, he has. We haven't seen much from him in coverage, by the way. So he's had 11 coverage snaps, has not been targeted during that time. But the Ravens clearly went to some effort to drop him and see what he could do, which is interesting. So, a lot of times they'll have a guard. I remember Nico Siragusa was coming back for his first playing time, horrific injury after the being drafted out of San Diego State and had multiple tears in the knee and had to be reconstructed and whatnot. And then he came back and he played in a preseason game where they designed 7 pulls to try and get a look at what he was doing, really get an evaluation on Nico Siragusa at the time. And I think they did that for Malik Ham as well. They're trying to set specific plays to see, hey, what can this guy do? Because you look at the rest of this group, David Ajabo, Tavius Robinson, Jadeveon Clowney, and Adafeowe certainly has characteristics which would lead him to a Sam linebacker, but not necessarily, they don't want him on that side. They'd rather have him on the rush side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was sort of a confluence of events last year that really sort of conspired against, Owe in the first half of the season, and he had to, play out of position, and that really affected him. And you could see the trajectory once Tyus Bowser came back in terms of the pressures and the effectiveness that Owe had. Really, made it such that we would certainly hope that Owe could be on the rush side and not have to repeat what he went through last season.
Yeah, it's ideal, and just in terms of development, you got the coach in house that's supposed to be the pass rush guru. You've got an ability to put him opposite a naked tackle as often as possible. They're uncovered. Meaning he has to beat a tackle one-on-one. That's what you want from Adafeowe. You really don't want to put him back on a side where there's a lot of chip blocking, where he has to drop to coverage a lot, where the responsibilities are just different. And anyway, hope to see that. Malik Ham, really excited about what he can do. And I think he's going to get a chance to play right away. I think he'll be a game day activation for week 1 based on them putting on the roster. Otherwise, I really don't think there'd be a reason to do it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you actually whether you had a better sense of this than I did regarding Malik Ham. He's a couple folks in the media have been mentioning him as an IR candidate just because he had some kind of ankle injury. But as far as and I can understand if people are saying that just from like a roster construction perspective, but I was not aware that his injury was necessarily significant enough to warrant that. So I'm wondering if you're familiar with that.
I'm familiar that he's missed some practice time, that he missed the last preseason game. So that's the extent of my understanding on the topic. And frankly, whenever injuries get reported, they get misreported by the Ravens brass. So I'm not really, I can't try and play their heads on what's going on. I'll play their words a little bit, but I can't try to figure out what's going on with that. So Blake Cam, anyway, on the roster, I do expect he'll see some action. I think Tavius Robinson is a fairly natural sit at this point. If you're looking for who are the 5 guys or perhaps the 7 guys, but it's 5, 2, 7 each week that will sit on this team. It's not too hard to figure out. There's 2 offensive linemen. Actually, there's 1 offensive lineman right now that will sit because they've only got 9 on the team, but I think they may have 10 before the opener. Right. So anyway, an interesting move. Let's talk about other players, maybe some surprising players who made it. Now, you've seen the list, but there's one guy who really kind of stands out to me as a surprise that he made it, and that's Arthur Mollett, the cornerback. $220,000 in guaranteed money. But did you see that coming?
Yeah, I mean, no, not necessarily. Particularly, I guess, with someone like Tay Hayes being cut as well. Mm-hmm. When Tay Hayes was cut, I kind of took that as a sign that they were going to stay with Caillou Kelly, just because, it's sort of like, are you trying to keep the people who are the most effective right now, or are you looking to, keep the draft pick, which the Ravens haven't always done, but often do. Mollett making it was a little bit of a surprise, but I don't necessarily think that that's, a bad selection. I mean, Caillou Kelly, you and I have talked about, he didn't show enough to say that, he could get on the field and help this team now. And given the depth concerns in the secondary, it's just, it's too serious of a problem to leave a spot on the 53-man roster for a developmental guy.
Right. Mollett gives them a backup slot corner, which I think is mm-hmm. something the team probably doesn't have, obviously. Otherwise, I don't think Brandon Stevens will move back to the slot. I think he's, at this point anyway, is an outside corner, a guy who you would want to keep there because that's where his value is going to be greater. They did, cut Kayvon Seymour, and we'll get into the other players who were cut in just a second. But Mollett was probably the biggest single surprise for me in terms of a guy who made the roster, who I really did not see that one coming.
Yeah, I would agree. I would have thought maybe some other DBs would have made it over him, but at the end of the day, I think that your conclusion is a reasonable one, that they're just looking for more depth at the slot position.
All right. Maybe we move on and talk about the vested veterans at this point, or maybe let's before we do that, let's talk about the surprising cuts, because there were maybe 2. You mentioned one of them. Let's talk about Tay Hayes first, who had a 2.8 passer rating during the preseason.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit befuddling to me. I think just given that they really, really need anybody out there who's showing any kind of competence in the defensive backfield on the team. So maybe they're just confident that they'll get him back. But I would have thought that he would have made it if they weren't going to keep Kelly. So how that played out overall was surprising. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't surprising to me necessarily until Kelly also didn't make the roster. So yeah, I mean, what do you think?
I was surprised by it. It's the kind of thing that I thought he gave them one of the best chances to play well now. He's a third-year guy, so if you were going to replace him with youth, that would be one thing. If Mollett is really taking his space, that's another. And I thought he just, you got an injured guy who hasn't played that much anyway, who you're already concerned about at his age might be done. I think, your first concern has to be get a good player in that secondary when the Ravens are going to face some divisional opponents early on. They'll face the Bengals, obviously, in week 2. and they need to have a cornerback who can play. And Tay Hayes stood out over all the other Ravens corners like Babe Ruth in a Babe Ruth league in this preseason. I mean, he's just very dominant. And I didn't get it. Now they obviously they feel they can get him for their practice squad. We'll find out if he was claimed, if any Ravens were claimed at all, for that matter. They have a couple guys I'm concerned about getting cut that are good waiver claims. I guess we can hit on them if you want to, but Vokalek I'm concerned in a minor way because I think he's a high utility tight end that a lot of teams may want. The other guy is Tashawn Manning. That he played very well, played a fair number of snaps for the Ravens, much more than any other third string lineman, any of the third team linemen. Manning had by far the most snaps, and he'd be a guy I'd be concerned about them losing.
Yeah, linemen and corners seem to really get picked off during this time. So I think that's very reasonable. Vokalek, I mean, I think, you can almost like hear the gnashing of the teeth, when Vokalek doesn't make the roster and they're like, oh my God, we're going to lose him. But it's like, who does Vokalek, unseat on game day, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's not, right now, I don't see him making his way onto the game day. And it's like, okay, if you're 3 tight ends deep, some sacrifices have to be made when you're constructing your roster, and your 4th tight end, I don't think should be taking as much of people's sort of like, emotional, capacity as Vokalek seems to have. He's done very well. I think that if he gets picked up by another team, they'll be happy with him, but it's just not a need for us.
It was an interesting situation for the Ravens because I don't think Patrick Ricard's spot was necessarily 100% secure. And in his case, just a financial consideration. He's clearly the best player available for whether you consider him having a fullback or having the extra tight end. I really thought the Ravens needed him in terms of continuing to have a way to close out games. You don't want to have this team become the run and shoot team that can't close out a game. And there's already, evidence of that from the preseason of them getting outsnapped massively in these games. And it's the last thing I want to see is a tired defense in the fourth quarter after what happened last year. So Ricard is the best medicine for that in terms of being a guy who's a great point of attack player and can help the run game go even when the other team knows it's coming. In terms of him making the roster, though, I think the key player was Charlie Kolar in week 3, who had a great receiving game and an absolutely terrible blocking game, just awful. And I think, once you're there and you think, well, we can line up Charlie Kolar in the backfield in the fourth quarter of some games to help try and close him out, or we have Ricard still if we want him. I think that helped them make the decision.
Yeah, I mean, if over the course of 3 preseason games, Charlie Kolar showed the Ravens that he could, be, even 75% as effective as Ricard on blocking consistently. I think, at least they would have had a conversation with Ricard and sort of maybe asked him to take a pay cut or something like that. But yeah, no, I think they value the diversity of skill sets very much, which I think is a promising thing. And I hope that, it means that Monken is going to live up to his promise of tailoring his offense to the talent that he has and not the other way around.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Maybe we talk about a couple other surprising cuts here. The big one to me, and part of it was I did not and still do not understand the designation of this player, is Sam Mustipher. Now, Sam Mustipher is the Ravens' 7th best offensive lineman. I feel confident saying that. The guys who didn't play at all during the preseason, basically, and plus John Simpson, I'd put all those 6 guys ahead of them. So it's McCary and all the starting offensive linemen. But Sam Mustipher is the next best. It hasn't been Cleveland, who, you make a good case. He's been better than Saleh this preseason, certainly, and there's reason to keep him on the roster. But Sam Mustipher, I am shocked that he didn't make the team. And then I see he's listed in the vested veterans category. I have no idea why that's true. and this is a rare occurrence where I've had some discussions with Brian McFarland about this, he doesn't know either, because he does not seem to have 4 years worth of service. And he got cut by the Ravens. And yet, according to the NFL's designation, he's a vested veteran and he's not subject to waivers, which is a very big deal. It essentially moves him to the handshake crew from being. And anyway, Mustafa, I mean, talk about him, first of all, preseason. How did he look to you there? And then are you surprised the Ravens, didn't keep him over, say, Cleveland or keep a 10th offensive lineman?
Well, knowing what we know now about his designation, I think that makes a lot of sense, assuming that they feel confident about that handshake agreement. And I think at the end of the day, you talk to the player and you take them at their word. I think not a whole lot else that you can do. I think Mustafa looked competent. I think he, I think you mentioned the last time that we, had a, large center was back in the Matt Burke days. And I remember draft after draft, just like wishing we would just take one of these gigantic centers that we seem to always pass over. And, I'm hopeful about Linderbaum. I think that he's going to be good, but naturally he's going to have some issues, just being the size that he is. So, from that perspective, it's sort of fun to just, see Mustafa in there and just see that, what a hulking offensive line would sort of look. But yeah, I mean, I think he proved himself to be a very capable backup. And so I would hope, I'm very hopeful that he'll, be back on the team shortly. And I think he's a big part of what would look like one of the deepest offensive lines that we've had in some time. Mm-hmm. I'm just assuming that Ronnie Stanley's healthy, and I don't have any information that he isn't, just the fact of how extreme they've been with holding him out. I think you have to feel as good about the health and the depth of this offensive line as any in the past, 10 years or so.
Yeah. And that's pretty well the period of time. And you go back to the Burke, Grubbs, Yanda era offensive lines. There were a lot of great offensive lines during that period, including probably the 2008 line or the 2009 line. One of those two was the best. It's 08. 08, they still had Jason Brown. 09 is when they picked up Burke, and they had Gaither at left tackle and Orr at right tackle. That offensive line was fantastic, and Yanda obviously at right guard. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I'm happy with the depth on this offensive line. One of the issues, and one of the reasons I think they needed 10 offensive linemen and not 9, and maybe they're still working towards that, is that they have 2 developmental linemen on the team. Yeah. And there are, people who have kind of a snarky way about them will call Cleveland a developmental lineman. He's not that. I mean, you could say he's a below average lineman. That might not be unfair at this point. You could say he's just above the replacement level if you want to be that way. But that might be fair. It might be where he ends up. But he's not a completely unknown quantity. And the guys who are not ready for prime time right now are Faalele and Saleh. You'd be legitimately scared having them out on Sunday in terms of what might occur if they're there. I think Cleveland is on the roster now. It looks a lot like the Tyree Phillips deal a year ago, where they kept 11 offensive linemen, and they obviously were just doing so to try and find a trade partner for Phillips for a period of time. Actually, it wasn't obvious they were doing it for Phillips. It was unobvious that they were doing it, and then they ended up cutting Phillips.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think Cleveland, earned his spot. I wouldn't say that he played better than Mustafa, but again, Mustafa's designation is what it is, and that helps some things. But I think you have to be happy with what you saw from Cleveland. I mean, people just seized on that one clip against the Eagles, and and anybody can look bad in one play. I mean, I remember Marshawn Lynch, breaking Jarrett Johnson and Ray Lewis's ankles on one play. If you judge Ray Lewis's career on that one play, well, then he didn't have a very good one. But I think Cleveland is going to be a significant part of this team's depth. And looked pretty decent.
Yeah, if you want 8 offensive linemen, the 8 offensive linemen on game day is primarily a safety thing, but the 8 offensive linemen carried during the regular season that you can trust is not just safety. That's real depth. You need those guys on an ongoing basis. So you can get by week to week if your seventh guy is good, but if you're pretty good, and the Ravens have that. If they bring Mustapher back and they have McCary as their other backup, that's very solid. But the problem is somebody gets hurt. Now you're down to 6 good offensive linemen. You don't want to be in that position. So you want to have somebody else who can really step in and play. You don't want to have it be a Sala or a Fa'alele at their current stage of development. And by the way, that needs to change. I mean, one of those two guys needs to step up and be able to play at some point in 23, or I think they're going to have to move forward from the developmental component of this and find, just move on to new players. Because Fa'alele in particular, he has to show development. I hope he never sees the field, frankly, this year, but he has to see development in the practices for the Ravens. He has to convince the coaches that he's taken some steps, and he needs to learn how to start striking with those massive paws of his, because that's just giving away his gifts to do this contactless mirroring that upsets me so much if you listen to the show regularly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably no position group that the Ravens have been better at developing than offensive linemen. So I think there's a really good shot that one or both of those guys are going to see some development, and it's a real testament to the depth that we have ahead of them, that we were able and willing to keep both of them this year. I think they're pretty comfortable with. I think that means they're very comfortable with the health of the players ahead of them right now, and I think that the flexibility of somebody like McCary, of now somebody like Cleveland, and the pleasant surprise of John Simpson, I think it all contributes. It all works together.
Yeah, Simpson, they've done a wonderful job. I've felt like this was a masterclass in motivation. I've said that in other episodes. I don't have to go through that again, but they did just a wonderful job of developing Simpson and motivating Simpson this offseason. And it really is easy to see how a player like that, coming from a crap situation in Oakland where he's jerked around between systems and he's jerked around between positions both. We've seen that destroy other linemen's career who were pretty good, like Michael Orr, where they moved from left tackle to right tackle, and all of a sudden their career production looks like a freaking ski slope in terms of what they've done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly thinking about this, how many players have had their careers and their potential futures upended by poor coaching, by poor organizations, by just people not seeing what the issue is, and how many players have been failed by things, and in some ways I think success can breed success. If you have that, if things start going right, then you start to believe that things can go right, and you've got a more motivated, keyed-in player, and but you have to be able to take those first steps. And if you're not in a situation where somebody can help you do that, you're in a tough spot.
Yeah, it's I want to stress that I think that Simpson himself was in a position, and I don't know his personality. We've seen him. He seems very grateful, very smiling, very happy that he's been awarded the left guard position. Seems like a very genuine position, but just when you're in a situation like he was in Oakland, where things suck just generally, and he's piling up a ton of penalties in the process, it's very easy for an individual in any profession, I'm not just talking about a football player, by the way, to make excuses for themselves and say, look, this is a crappy situation. This is why I have terrible coaching. That's why the holding penalties kept coming up. And he had 17 penalties in 1,545 snaps, which is way too many, and would be one of the highest rates in the entire National Football League for linemen. But if all of them were false starts, you'd say, well, we can work on correcting that. And also it's kind of a cost of doing business, but they weren't. It's 2 false starts, 13 holds, and 2 personal fouls. That is absolutely untenable. So it's easy to see why Oakland cut him, or Las Vegas cut him, I should say. But it doesn't make sense to me. Sorry, it would make a lot of sense to me that he would have come to Baltimore with lots of excuses and the chip on the wrong shoulder, meaning not I have to get better. And then the Ravens dangle this Saleh thing in front of him like a red cape to a bull and say, you know what? We like Saleh, our 6th-round draft pick. We're going to stick him in at left guard from the beginning of OTA, see what he's got. And then all of a sudden they announce, when it's a week away, that, next week we're going to switch to John Simpson because they each deserve to get a look at the first thing. We've called this a competition all the way along. What they really meant was this is a way to try and motivate John Simpson to improve the elements of his game, to put that on his plate, that, you need to take responsibility for these things.
Yeah, and I think, I like you. I'm not super familiar with John Simpson before coming to the Ravens, but I think one thing that you would have to conclude from how this has all went is that he's coachable. He's coachable, and he hasn't reached his peak, and he should ostensibly continue to maintain this level at least, and hopefully even show some more improvement, given that obviously the coaching is doing something for him here.
Yeah, I'm bullish on his season. If you're looking for him to play the way he did in the preseason for the entire regular season, that ain't happening. But, right. but it would be. He was nearly perfect this preseason, and I hope he can maintain the obvious attention to reducing penalties and didn't make pass blocking errors. That's the other big thing. He didn't have a single error, frankly, of any sort. He didn't have a negative play of any sort this preseason as I scored it. And he had only 3 missed blocks the entire, which is just, it's like one full game that he played, but essentially he played a game that is approximately equivalent to some of the best games Marshall Yanda's had, the top 25% of Marshall Yanda's game for the entire preseason. That's very encouraging, obviously, for that to happen.
It's pretty good, and it'll be great news if the Ravens are so thrilled with him that we're talking an extension, somewhere in the middle of the season.
That would be very cool, and they could easily get a jump start on that if things work out. That I think they're not going to get any more cornerstone players than what they have. There isn't another $15-18 million per year contract that they're going to fit in next year anyway, where they have a ton of free agents to replace.
Yeah. But
there always is room potentially for a supporting cast player, and keeping together a great offensive line would be really cool. And what would be even cooler is if Andrew Voorhees could immediately step in on the right side and be the guy they hope he is.
Yeah. And, John Simpson seems like one of those classic, Ravens, like buy low contracts, where they're like, we see where this is going. Let's take a little bit of the risk off of your plate, and you give us a decent deal.
There you go. Yeah, divisible benefit. Let's talk about the vested veterans for a minute and some of the guys who were cut, because there were 9 vested veterans cut, and a fair number of these I expect to play for the Baltimore Ravens in 2023. But the group is Angelo Blackson, who was on my list of 4 handshake deals, Melvin Gordon, who I don't think is going to be back, Josh Johnson, who you've already mentioned. Actually, it might have been in the production meeting. So tell me what you think might be the fate of Josh Johnson.
So, I mean, I certainly think that Josh Johnson would be at or near the top of my list of players to come back to the practice squad. But, given this new rule with the emergency quarterback, there is some benefit of having him on the 53, but I think most likely it's more likely that he's practice squad, and then they can start elevating him, which they might need to starting week 1, because it's not clear what Snoop's health situation is with his hamstring.
So if they did do that, they've got a couple of possibilities. One is keep Brown and him on the roster, elevate. Use 4 elevations the first 4 weeks, because they're going to be 4 weeks without Snoop. And then after that, hopefully Huntley is back. There's no issue the rest of the season, and maybe you don't need another quarterback, but they'd have to have Anthony Brown, I believe, available for at least one of those weeks if they don't elevate Johnson to the active roster. But it's a great way to save a spot, by the way, what you just suggested.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot that they can do with it, and I have to think that's the motivating factor for doing this the way that they did, because, quite frankly, I think that Josh Johnson looked better. I mean, I know that like
Mhm.
when Snoop came in that first game and sort of things seemed to liven up, but he was playing in the second half, number one. And I mean, really, I think that's the biggest thing, right? He's not playing against as good competition. And Josh Johnson just looked very competent. He looked like he was making his reads, really good on the deep throws. And I just, I think the Ravens know everything that they're going to know about Tyler Huntley, and I think he is performed admirably, but I think his ceiling is just too low for my liking.
Yeah, very happy with Josh Johnson under pressure in particular. Let's
yeah.
continue going through this terminated vested veteran list. Sam Mustipher, again, have no idea how he fits into this category or why he fits into this category, but, happy birthday to us, I suppose, that he's a vested veteran, not a fourth-year player. So he won't be subject to waivers today. The Ravens, I'm fairly confident, will want him back, maybe for week 1. I would think probably for week 1, if they really want to go into it with him, they might bring him back week 2. It just, give themselves an extra insurance policy. If he suddenly regresses to the way he played in Chicago, then you have a way out of that contract if that's what you want to do. But there are, elements of this tell me they're trying to trade Cleveland because they haven't really given him a fair shot this year, in my opinion. That maybe there wasn't room for 3 people in that left guard competition, but I haven't felt like they've been I still feel like he's kind of in the doghouse.
This is one of like, I'm a big John Harbaugh fan overall. I think that, if you're not, you really don't remember the majority of Brian Billick's time here. But this is one of like 3 things that he does that drives me nuts. He just gets pissed off at a guy and just, continues to, when your decisions start to outweigh like the objective evaluation of a player, if there's a lesson to be learned from all of this, then, either Cleveland has learned it or he hasn't at this point. So, at this point, let's get back to doing the work of building the best football team possible. And sometimes, these things get in the way and it drives me nuts.
I know we have a large STEM audience to this show and to basically to all the shows that I do basically, but I'll say this, everybody who's been a manager, you've had frustrating employees. You've had employees that have frustrated the hell over you over the years. And sometimes these people can be improved and coached up and made into better people and made to take their own responsibility. And sometimes it can't happen. And so the Ravens have had the Tim Williams type who had lots of talent and they're never going to succeed because they can't stop acting like an idiot, basically. Right. But then you've had other guys who are underperformers and you kind of like them and they're working hard. And still, sometimes the best thing you can do for that person is to just cut them loose because they're not, succeeding in their role. If you're really being honest with yourself, they don't have a really good chance to succeed in the role. Cleveland is like the worst combination of both of those because, he's a pure country guy. He may or may not love the game is one thing, I've heard about him, but he's an enormous human being and people think he ought to be a good offensive lineman and the Ravens think they ought to get trade value for him. And I can't tell, but there may even be some friction between Harbaugh and EDC about not wanting to let that value get out of house. Although, ironically, the talk is that Cleveland was really Harbaugh's guy in the draft room.
And maybe that's why he's so salty about it. And maybe he's like, I pounded the table for you, and you embarrassed me. Who knows?
So anyway, if you've dealt with employees that are difficult and you need them to perform in technical roles or non-technical roles where you need them to just succeed, I think that a lot of what Ben Cleveland's plight has been here, or maybe even what Tim Williams' plight will be familiar to you in terms of that. But it's a point at which they got to fish or cut bait at some point with Cleveland, and I think that he's a guy who, given playing time, I think could be very effective still. But maybe he does need a fresh start to get going again. And unfortunately, I don't think the Ravens are going to get really anything in terms of return for him at this point. I think it's probably a 6 for a 7 kind of deal. That kind of thing is about the best they would do in this. Maybe just a conditional 7.
I think he has value to add to this team, quite frankly, at least this year. And When Voorhees comes back, maybe that is a different story. But if he can help you right now, I don't think a 6th and a 7th is worth it. That's for sure.
Okay. Well, as you go down this list of vested veterans, and Mustafa is a guy I expect back. However, they resolve the Cleveland situation. They may go to IR with a player. Either Salah or Faalele would be the easiest player to IR because you're not really missing that developmental player. But what you are missing is the opportunity for that developmental player to develop on the practice squad. So you don't want either of those guys going to any kind of season-ending IR. Sure, but if it's short-term,
sure,
it allows you to get Mustafa on the roster. They have to sit down for practice for 4 weeks. They still get to go to the meetings. I'd be kind of okay with it.
Yeah, I think they've got a few IR candidates. Mitchell has been floated quite a bit, and you would think that the 3 running backs that we have would be enough depth, knock on wood, for those 4 weeks. Pepe, we know, is going to go on IR. You got to wonder about Marlon. I mean, Marlon says he wants to be there, week 1, but we'll see about that. Yeah,
and he could end up on IR. I think Mollett could also end up on IR based on what's happened. And then they've effectively stashed another midseason replacement at corner. I'm not sure exactly how this is going to work out, but it does look like most of these guys will be back. Let's go to the bottom of the terminated vested veterans. Kayvon Seymour, I fully expect to be back because he's a very important special teams player. He's probably the Ravens' number 4 outside cornerback right now. I think he and Stevens is ahead of him, but I don't think anybody else is ahead of those 2. After
what makes you say? I'm just curious. Do you think Stevens outperformed Seymour in the preseason, or do you just think as far as where they are in their development or something like that?
I think it's a matter of the ascendancy of Stevens towards the end of the 2022 season. Frankly, I thought it was ridiculous that he would move back to safety after that.
Yeah. What
had happened. But the Ravens thought they had a ton of depth they had to work through. Oh, Jalen Armour-Davis is going to be great and whatnot. And now, we've been disabused of a number of these thoughts with the preseason. A release of Caillou Kelly, being a big deal. Anybody can have him. Anybody can have Caillou Kelly today. And there's nothing the Ravens can do about it. Ravens will try and re-sign him to the practice squad. It's a really unfortunate situation that he went through here, but they picked Arthur Mollett ahead of him for the 53. It's just
it's not great.
No, it's not a great look. It's really not a great look, and it's possible that he'll be back at some point this season because, as we know, cornerback injuries tend to accumulate every year, unfortunately. And I still think that Kayvon Seymour is probably the second man who will see playing time after Stevens. And I would agree with you if you're asking me why not Seymour before Stevens. I would basically agree with you that it's a toss up.
Sure.
Between those 2. I do think it would probably be Stevens first, but it's just my opinion, and I would understand if somebody arguing the other way. And Kayvon Seymour, very important for special teams, so they're going to want him back for that.
Yep.
David Sharp, no surprise at all there. He was cut last year and survived being claimed. He's been claimed before as a free agent. By the way, David Sharp is not some spring chicken now. He's like 28 years old, or will be very shortly. And he's not a young man anymore in National Football League teams, as is evidenced by the vested veteran distinction. By the way, is the correct word evidenced or evinced, or are they both correct?
I think that if evidenced is a word, then it means the same thing as evinced.
Okay, but evidence might not be a word, is what you're telling me. And that's the nice way of saying it. That's a consultant way of telling you, you were this close. Yeah, I appreciate that. All right. Laquan Treadwell, not a surprise. He's reportedly signing with the practice squad, which is the last topic I want to talk about is what should be their practice squad strategy this year. And then Brent Urban and Daryl Worley. Everybody expects Brent Urban to be back because they've really only got 4 defensive linemen right now.
Yep.
That's not, they've listed Jadeveon Clowney as a defensive lineman, but that ain't what he is. He's an outside linebacker or an edge rusher. He's not one of their interior guys. You wouldn't be a guy you'd want to start at 5 tech on week 1.
Yeah, I think if I don't really have anything to add on Brent Urban or Daryl Worley. I think they're both going to be back. I think they both have a role to play. Hopefully, Daryl Worley doesn't think that there's a better opportunity for him out there because quite frankly, I think there's a better than 50% chance that Daryl Worley will be playing some snaps at corner this season. So particularly early on. So I think it would behoove him to sign with us. As far as the practice squad, I kind of think that we kind of have to look at like what positions we're going to be reloading at, as the seasons continue. I think, we're going to have some turnover at receiver and some other position groups.
So that's a great point. So there's at least a couple of major concerns. And one is, the reload is at the center. They have a tremendous number of UDFAs that are going to pass through the Python this off season, meaning after 23, before 24. It's a scary number, and it's a scary amount of talent as well. Some of the top players on the team, like J.K. Dobbins and Kevin Zeitler, and players like that are going to be free agents. Odell Beckham, Nelson Aguilar. Their receiving crew is going to have to get turned over. So they've got a lot to try and figure out how they're going to replace in 24. To me, the first priority has to be get R-on-1 guys this year. And regardless of where you have to replace talent, you need some cheap in terms of the 24 roster. And that's why Keaton Mitchell was so important. I'm glad he made the team. It's a great move for the 23 Ravens. It's an even greater move for the 24 Ravens.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the ideal situation would have been, it's a good problem to have, right? Keaton Mitchell was too good to put on the practice squad.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, you would have him on the practice squad, but no, that was just too high of a risk. I mean, I think they've got some, exciting prospects, at least visually, on in the wide receiver position. Sean Ryan did some stuff, and so did Dante Demas.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to make like one or two good plays against backup guys, but they at least have the size and shape, sort of wingspan kind of thing that you look at, and so they flashed a little. And knowing that the receiver group is going to be one that's definitely going to have some turnover next season, because even if OBJ has a phenomenal season, you're not going to offer him what we offered him this year. We paid a premium for him, and that's been done, but it's not going to happen twice.
Yeah, it's a very good point there, by the way.
Right, particularly given that Zay Flowers has shown to be a pretty good pick so far. Mm-hmm. So assuming that continues, that's even more reason to think. So I think the receivers would be high priority. Vokalek looked good. Hopefully he doesn't get snatched up. But you got to start thinking. You're not going to sign all of the. You're a few seasons down the line. You're not going to be re-signing Andrews and Likely and Kolar and stuff. So at some point, you just got to think ahead, and I think he could fit into our plans in the future.
Yeah, one of the things about the practice squad is it's usually fairly well distributed among the position groups. So you're thinking we might need a safety next year, for example. And Daryl Worley, of course, is not signed for 2024, and neither is Geno Stone. And while they've got two excellent safeties to start with, that doesn't leave open for the possibility of returning to dime. It doesn't, there's some things that are not addressed there. And in particular, I don't see a reason why the Ravens have to be a committed nickel team again in 2024. They might be. John Simpson might be a player who does it, but it's not guaranteed. You're kind of open there. So additional safety depth is something they might be looking for. Now let's look at one particular decision. DeAndre Houston Carson, I thought, played reasonably well this preseason, but he's an 8th-year player.
Right.
And to put him on your practice squad and say release outright a player like Jeremy Lucien, I think would be a huge mistake. I think you want to look at those two and see who's the better developmental prospect, particularly at that position. And so I'm expecting Lucien to be back as a practice squad signing. I'll be very upset if Houston Carson takes up a spot on the practice squad. And it's not because they're not similarly effective players, let's say right now, because he made some plays in the preseason. They each recovered a fumble, which was kind of interesting, the thing. And there's things to like about each player, but I think you go with youth this year in particular because of the 24 rebuild that's going to have to occur. And it needs to be a rebuild on the fly, but it's going to be a rebuild nonetheless.
Yeah. I mean, at some point, I think it becomes unreasonable to pick nits between between such similarly skilled players when one clearly just has so much more advantage to reloading at that position, particularly given our salary cap situation going into next year. So I think that makes a lot of sense. We know that Lucien can work hard because he was an engineering major. I was an engineering major for undergrad, and it's not easy. And so that if I got nothing else out of it, I learned how to work very, very hard. So I firmly believe that he has a future here.
Yeah. It sounds very good. You hear the story from the player, but it sounds very good in terms of what the Ravens like about him, in terms of his ability to pick up the defense very quickly and understand what's going on from visually seeing it on the field. So I'm optimistic about that, and we'll see how that plays out. But the Ravens also, of course, will look at other teams' cuts. This is one of the interesting things about this year. If you look at practice squads, they largely come from the team's own cuts, and they only trickle in over the season to add players who are other teams' cuts. So there's a handful of waiver claims league wide. I mean, I don't remember what the total is, but it's like half a player per team or something. So there might be 16 to 20 waiver claims made per today. But anyway, there's then a period where you kind of watch the other team's preseason tape then, and bandwidth is not at a level, I don't think, in NFL organizations to look at every player on every other 90-man roster.
Yeah.
To try and figure out who's available. And that's why you end up with a lot of your own guys. You also have experience with them in-house, so you can say, well, I like, Johnny over Eddie here because he has a better work ethic, and he's always on time for the meetings, and he's always the guy who raises his hand first to say, I understand what that means. You have more direct contact with those people, so you're going to have a bias towards them to start with. But I think that the bandwidth is a big issue for NFL teams this time of year in terms of being able to figure out who's good on other teams' rosters.
Yeah, and like you said, just trusting your own talent evaluation, I think, is really important. You've spent hours and hours and hours coaching these guys, observing their tendencies, and if you know that this guy could, if you're comfortable with the notion that this guy could be elevated and play on game day, why would you risk that unless you really have seen something that just absolutely flashed on tape? And the odds of that, given the the fact that team elected to cut that player, don't seem very high to me. If a team has just an embarrassment of riches at a particular position, I think that's kind of where it happens a little bit. But then a lot of times those teams will try to trade those players rather than cut them.
Yeah. All right. I think we've been through a lot of the topics here. Is there anything else about the roster construction or the way things were selected out, or anything that maybe sticks out that you want to point out at this time?
Nothing in particular. I mean, I guess if you had any thoughts on any of the defensive guys who could be on the practice squad, Ross, Welch.
Yeah, that's a good point. I did have a list of guys that I thought were ones that they really want to do. The big guys. I mean, if you go down the list, Tariq Black, I'd like back. Tay Hayes, I'd like to make sure he stays in the building. Kelly, I think you want to continue to try and work with. unless there's something, there's a reason why they don't like Kelly now that they drafted him.
Yeah.
Then I think you try and continue working with him. To Sean Manning, priority practice squad guy. Jeremiah Moon, I would keep around. I think he's a potential Sam guy. He made a nice play in coverage in one of the games. I think you can keep 2 of the 3 defensive linemen between Nichols, Khaim Caesar, and Trey Botts. I don't know if there's 2 who really deserve it, but if they're, I think I'd keep Nichols for sure, and I'd probably keep one of the other 2. And I might be tempted to keep Caesar because I think the body type is a little harder to find than with Botts.
Sure.
I would agree. Ross is a good guy. I definitely make a priority out of Vokalek in case anything happens during the season. And I'm not married to Owen Wright, but he certainly looked the part in that last preseason game. So it's a matter of trying to determine whether he or somebody else is R or 1 guy. But Wright versus Gordon is another fairly obvious choice for me in terms of tenure. You don't own any of Melvin Gordon's future. Yeah. You do have the future of Owen Wright in hand.
Yeah, I do. I do actually think that Melvin Gordon put on some decent tape relative to what I expected. I mean, I don't think he has any place on our practice squad, certainly, just given the depth of our room. But I think he showed more juice than I expected him to have based on some of the things. So hopefully he makes it somewhere else.
Yep. Good for him. I would say the same thing about James Crochet, by the way, and he's not a guy that I would make a practice squad for, given his tenure and the fact that the Ravens don't have any stake in his future other than at market value. So they need to find some guys who are, year 1, and there'll be some among other cuts that they like, and there'll be some they figure out over time they like. Yeah,
rough summer for Crochet, but I really. I like him. I think he did, a few nice things when he was there, but outweighed by some of the other unfortunate plays. And I think a change of scenery would really do wonders for him. So hopefully he gets it figured out. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Slava, always a pleasure doing this show with you. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
I'm on Twitter at Slava Cooperstein. That's SLAVA KUPERSTEIN.
All right, outstanding. Other folks out there, if you want to do a film study short, hit me up with a DM. They're always open on Twitter. I love new ideas. Slava's always come to me with stuff, and we turned a couple of shorts here into a regular show that we're going to be doing all season. So I love to find that kind of relationship, and I always want to find new people online that I can talk football with. That's why I do what I do. Anyway, Slava, we'll see you next week.
See you next weekend.